Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to our virtual learning program, Coping with COVID-19, Supporting Each Other to Survive Isolation. Ken Phelps here from the Daytona Regional Chamber of Commerce, and these are certainly some trying times, and this is kind of one aspect, maybe a little underutilized in terms of making sure you stay healthy through this process. We know all about the hand washing and that kind of stuff, but there's some other aspects to address, and we're going to talk about that today. A couple of housekeeping items. If they're not already, mute your microphones to minimize background noise and interference so everyone can hear accurately and correctly. If you have a question or comment at any point during the presentation, use the chat so we'll be able to get to as many of those as we can in the allotted time we've got. And if you miss something, we're recording the session, so you'll be able to view it as soon as it's downloaded and up on our COVID-19 resource page in the Daytona Regional Chamber of Commerce YouTube channel. So with that said, we'll get the show on the road, and it's my pleasure to welcome Shawn Proctor, mental health awareness training coordinator at SMA Healthcare for today's webinar. And Shawn, you mentioned that was a mouthful, and I couldn't get it out correctly, but I kind of like your acronym for that, so we'll just call you an MHAT coordinator, as you mentioned earlier. So thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us this morning, and I'll let you take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Ken. And I'm going to get my presentation up here real quick. And there it is. We're going to... There it is. So, as you said, Mental Health Awareness Training Coordinator. That is a mouthful. It's hard to spit out. And we call it the MHAT program. And the reason I have that title, I will go ahead and kind of introduce myself and just let you know. Again, my name's Shawn Proctor, and the Mental Health Awareness Training is a grant that we received from SAMHSA to do mental health first aid classes. And mental health first aid is an 8-hour all-day seminar, basically, on how to recognize signs and symptoms of mental illness, of common mental health struggles, and how to help people through that. And right now, we can't do that because it's only an in-person seminar. It's not something we can do online. So right now, it's interesting. We're getting to do this little webinar here, and I hope that it's helpful for people as we talk about how to live through this new situation that we're finding ourselves in. And Ken, as you just said, it's really important to think about hand washing and think about wearing a mask and things like that, but we may not be paying enough attention to some of the other risks that are really going on here. And hopefully this will introduce people to some common mental health problems that might come up, some struggles that might come up for people during this time while we're all kind of stuck together, yet so far apart. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the scope of mental health concerns in the United States and in the workplace. I want to go through the most common mental health problems, just briefly talk about depression and talk about anxiety. The most important thing to know is how to recognize this stuff in people and in yourself so that when you see these signs and symptoms coming up, you can recognize it. Hey, maybe there's something I might need a little bit of help for, or maybe there's some things I can do to help myself through this. And though depression and anxiety, I think, are the two common mental health struggles that might really come up during this time. We'll talk about the risk factors for those things. Talk about the effect of this social isolation that we're all going through right now, and how that might feed depression or anxiety. And also talk about how to try and support somebody who seems to be having this struggle. First thing I want to say is, don't worry, Chuck is on the case. This thing will all be over soon, I hope. And you know, all joking aside, one of the few things that we've gotten that's really positive out of this are some really great memes and jokes on Facebook about it. But, you know, there's going to be some really serious consequences to all this isolation that we have and all of this quarantine that we have. And hopefully that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. So just talking about mental health problems in general, I think it's important just to get a basic awareness of our situation anyway. 2018, 1 out of every 5 adults in the United States experienced a mental illness, and 1 out of every 25 adults experience a serious mental illness. But if you look at that 1 out of every 5 numbers, that's a lot of people. I think sometimes people don't recognize how common a mental health struggle is, and that's where we get so much stigma related to mental health problems. And we call people crazy and we do things like that. And sorry, I might get a phone ring because I'm in an office and I don't know how to stop that thing. So we may sometimes throw words on people, tell them that they're crazy, say that they're nuts, they're not handling things properly. Sometimes someone's depressed and we say that they're lazy. We have to recognize how common these issues truly are in our country right now. And they are not going to be better during this time of high stress and isolation. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Mental health and substance abuse related concerns accounted for 1 out of every 8 ER visits. So if you think about all the things that people go to the ER for, 1 out of every 8 has to do with mental health or substance abuse. Not with a broken arm, not with having a heart attack or those kind of things. So you see how common this really is. And to go into even more about how common it is, so we'll just talk about a few diagnoses that are commonly talked about. Major depressive disorder. This is just one diagnosis that might go along with the struggle with depression. And it's over 7% of the population within a given year could experience major depressive disorder. And I think it's important too to recognize there that this is just within a given year. So this is not accounting people who maybe have a recurrent form of major depressive disorder where it kind of comes back. And if you have a depressive episode, you are at risk for having more in your life. So if you, for instance, maybe you have a recurrent form of major depressive disorder, but you're not having it this year, so you're not necessarily getting counting in those numbers, if that makes any sense to you. So people that are affected by major depressive disorder would be a bigger number than that, I would say. Anxiety disorders, 19.1% of the population. That's really the most common type of disorder that we have as far as mental health concerns in the United States. And I want to recognize that a few things about that. Number one, that's just people who have a disorder related around anxiety, because we can be struggling with anxiety without necessarily having a diagnosis of an anxiety disorder. And especially these days with so much that's going on, and how these anxiety disorders can really affect us, how this anxiety can come up and create and perhaps become a disorder. But going on to substance use disorders, 8.1% of the population, still a lot of people. Post-traumatic stress disorder, 3.6%. Schizophrenia, which is a common diagnosis we hear about a lot because it gets very sensationalized in the news and movies and such, but it's less than 1% of the population. And bipolar disorder, 2.8%. These are just some common mental health struggles. Today, we're mostly just going to talk about anxiety and depression and how they might come up during this time. But a couple other things that are really important to notice. Suicide is currently the second leading cause of death for people 10 to 34. That's a statistic that gets lost on a lot of people. A lot of people don't realize how common suicide is as a cause of death. And it used to be third leading cause of death in that age group, but it has gone up to second within the last few years. Overall, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. And since 2001, suicide rates in the U.S. have increased by 31%. So suicide rates are going up. And I think in the current level of stress that we're in, obviously this is a concern. No. So here's some things, since we're here at the Chamber of Commerce, we're talking about business. Let's talk about a few things in the numbers that mental health problems or mental health struggles, how they affect the economy here. And substance abuse costs $740 billion in crime, lost productivity and healthcare costs. And depression and anxiety alone cost the world economy over $1 trillion every year. Depression is the leading cause of disability in the world. So you can see how much that affects our productivity, how much it affects how much we can create in the world, and how much that affects the economy. So let's go into depression a little bit and talk about this. Talk about how common depression really can be. And these are some of the symptoms that you commonly see listed, things that will that might qualify you for a diagnosis of, for instance, major depressive disorder. So a depressed mood, that means when you're feeling sad and you're feeling down. And anhedonia, which is the big word we use for just loss of interest or joy. You lose the interest in things that you used to really enjoy doing. And maybe hobbies that you used to do, you're no longer interested. Things that maybe you used to play the guitar, you're not interested in that anymore. Maybe you used to go fishing all the time, but that thing just doesn't bring you joy anymore. And those are the two biggest symptoms, actually. But you have all these other things too. You feel sped up or slowed down. We call that psychomotor retardation or psychomotor agitation. So you feel like you've been sped up or that you're really slowed down. Sometimes people feel like they're walking through molasses. They just don't have the energy to move through things. Fatigue, it's tired all the time. Feeling worthless, having excessive guilt, and not necessarily having a real pinpointed reason for why you feel guilty or why you feel worthless. You just do. Difficulty concentrating, have a very hard time paying attention and focusing on things. And thoughts of death or suicide obviously are huge. Now, you could see where a lot of those symptoms could very much get misinterpreted. And I think during this time, while we are finding ourselves really isolated, some of us might be working from home, which is an extreme change in our routines. And today I had to go to the church office because I've been working from home. And we have a very small house, and my daughter's also at home learning from home. And my wife and we've got 3 computers running at the same time, and there's a lot going on. And I had to go out of the house just to get away. And with all of this that's going on, you could see where some of these things, if you started experiencing them in your coworkers, in your employees, in your boss even, you might see these things as being laziness, or you might see them as somebody needs to just pick themselves up by their bootstraps. But right now, we're really talking about some major stressors in people's life that can bring these things up. Another thing that we've got with depression are physical symptoms. Depression is can be, I should say, maybe not always, but it can be a very, very physical illness. And all of these things: nausea, unexplained aches and pains, headaches, lack of energy, sleeping too much or not enough. It could go either way on that. Loss of appetite or overeating. It could go either way on that. Changes in menstrual cycle for women, loss of libido. If these things are happening, they're very physical. And some of these things, remember we just said that 1 out of every 8 trips to the ER are mental health or substance abuse related. You could have some of these symptoms and think you're having a heart attack and end up in the hospital. Really, you're just having problems with depression. And depression is just a very physical illness that we have to make sure that we remember that piece. And by the way, too, I keep using the word illness, but you do not have to necessarily have a diagnosis of a depressive disorder to be struggling with these things, especially right now under the circumstances. So your behaviors might change, and when you're experiencing depression, you might have your routine changes or it breaks down. Obviously, we just talked about how our routines are breaking up in our work lives, but other things that are kind of normal, just maintenance routines in your life, like sleeping, like eating, like exercise. People's exercise routines are definitely getting messed up right now. You can't go to the gym. You can't do things like that. Some people aren't getting out and doing the things that they used to do. People stop doing the things they enjoy. We kind of mentioned that, but if you see someone, they really are not doing their hobbies, their things that they enjoy. Maybe it's even certain types of socialization that they do with people. They're not doing it anymore. People may be really irritable. Irritability is a big deal when it comes to depression. There's a frustration that goes along with it. So you may look as though you lost all your motivation. It may look like you just have no reason to get up in the morning, or that you have no reason to do your job, or that you have no reason to complete certain goals. Appear to move slowly. Like I said, people feel like they can't move. Crying or feeling like you want to cry, and you don't know why. You have no real reasons behind this. You just feel like you need to cry. Neglect of your responsibilities. You may not be taking care of things. Maybe you're not taking care of your family, your kids. Maybe you're not taking care of pets. Maybe you're not taking care of your responsibilities for work. Increased use of alcohol and other substances. And right now, that's a big deal because, you know, we all know hurricane parties here in Florida, and there are people out there having their quarantine parties. And substance abuse is a big deal, and it affects your depression. Alcohol does not really make you happier. It might for a little while, but overall, it's really going to suppress your mood over time. And that substance use, increased substance use that people may be doing, may be a result of the depression because they're trying to self-medicate the depression and make themselves feel better. Or it could be the other way around too. It could really make you depressed if you start drinking more. So, if someone's been experiencing symptoms of depression for more days than not, so for most days out of a 2-week period or longer, you know, they might need to get some professional help. That might be the time when someone might needs to get professional help. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So let's switch over to anxiety. Talk about what anxiety looks like. Anxiety, I think we all know what anxiety is on some level because we all experience anxiety. If you don't experience some kind of anxiety, I'd probably be a little more worried about you because we all have some problems with anxiety. We all face it, I should say. I don't say that we shouldn't say we all have problems with it. We all face it. We all worry about things. We all are afraid of certain things happening, especially when there's times of stress. And that's a survival mechanism. We should. But some of these things here, the worry, fear, irritability, again, is a big thing. If you're noticing someone being grouchier than they normally are, then they're probably experiencing stress and could have a lot of anxiety or depression going along with it. Indecisiveness, because what if I make the wrong decision? Difficulty concentrating, again, really having a hard time focusing on things. Being confused, getting confused over things, and nervousness. Racing thoughts, fatigue, again, a lot of tiredness, vivid dreams, and sometimes we talk about flashbacks when we talk about things like post-traumatic stress disorder, which is an anxiety disorder. And sometimes people relive traumas. And we'll talk about trauma here in a minute, but you know, trauma being some really usually life-threatening or feels like life-threatening situation that someone goes through that creates trauma in their lives. Impatience. People can get very impatient when they have anxiety. Insomnia or sleeping too much. You might not sleep enough or you might be sleeping too much. Either one can occur here. Again, you have a lot of physical symptoms that go along with anxiety, just like depression. There are a lot of things that I made the comparison to a heart attack earlier, where if someone has a panic attack that's on this screen right here, that can really look like a heart attack. In fact, it's almost impossible for someone just looking at someone having a panic attack to be sure that it's not a heart attack. That's why you may need to go to the emergency room under that circumstance. But the tremors, shaking, nausea, diarrhea, shortness of breath, or you're breathing really fast, really shallow, rapid heart rate, sweating, dizziness, lightheaded, restlessness, appetite changes, panic attacks. That is a big one, panic attacks, aches and pains. And I've known some people having panic attacks right now just trying to go to the grocery store. And if you're not familiar with what a panic attack or an anxiety attack is, it's a really acute onset of all of these symptoms that happens at one time. And people can get pretty out of control as far as maybe crying, having a very hard time breathing, maybe can't even talk very much, can't make much sense out of what they're saying. They can be sweating profusely, having tremors, shaking, sometimes unable to really move around much, and it takes some time to calm down from a panic attack. It's a really acute onset of anxiety. And as far as anxiety, when people are experiencing symptoms of anxiety for 4 weeks or more, they might need some professional help. And these are just guidelines, not necessarily, because I think you have to take into consideration too how intense their anxiety or depression might be as far as the waiting 2 weeks or waiting 4 weeks for professional help. You have to think about how intense it is. If it's very intense, then you might want to seek professional help earlier. So risk factors for depression and anxiety. And I think one of the things to remember with this is that if we're thinking about our coworkers, if we're thinking about our friends, our neighbors, we're thinking about employees that we have, whether it's in your business setting, whether it is at home, whether it's family, sometimes we don't even know what risk factors somebody has. And not just what risk factors, but we don't know if someone's already struggling with one of these issues. For example, if someone is struggling with anxiety, maybe has an anxiety disorder, but they have it pretty well under control, and they come to work every day and they're doing great all the time because they've learned all the coping strategies that they need. And maybe, though, right now, those things are going to be exacerbated because of the amount of stress that people are under. And the same thing here with risk factors. We don't know what risk factors someone may already have in their past. And this is just something that's going to add to their stress. So risk factors are something that increases your probability of having an anxiety or depressive disorder or struggles with depression or anxiety. So things like family history, which is really kind of both genetics and it's also what you learn. And if you grew up in a household that has no coping strategies, for instance, you grew up in a household that the only thing they knew to do was to reach for a bottle when they were feeling upset, for instance, then you probably didn't learn good coping skills, and that may lead to anxiety or depression later in your life. History of childhood anxiety, the average age of onset is for anxiety disorders is 11 years old. So this is something that starts early, and actually studies are showing it earlier and earlier. For mental health first aid for the classes that I do, we officially use the age 11, but they're saying that next time when the new curriculum comes out, they're probably going to use the age of 7 because research keeps showing it to be younger and younger when these symptoms start to come up. Substance use definitely is a risk factor for developing anxiety or depression. And I used to work with a psychiatrist who his specialty was working with people who had substance use disorders and also had a mental health disorder of some kind. And he used to say, you know, it's really hard to diagnose a true mood disorder in anyone until they've been clean for a year, because I don't know that the substances were causing those problems. Having a baby, you know, we talk about postpartum depression. This is something that we're more and more aware of, and it's really common. It's like 22% of women could be diagnosed with postpartum depression after having a baby within that first year. So that's something to consider. Lack of sunlight. We don't have this problem as much in Florida, thank goodness. And I've met a lot of people who moved to Florida for this reason, because if you live up north, live in a place where there is not much sunlight, or even worse, you live close to the Arctic Circle and you know, in the winter, you have 23 hours of darkness every day, then it really does chemically affect you. And speaking of chemicals, a neurotransmitter imbalance. So our main neurotransmitter that affects depression, for instance, is serotonin, although others like norepinephrine and GABA seem to have a effect as well. Side effects of medication can also cause anxiety or depression. And so this is a good reason why it's a good thing to talk to a doctor when you are having problems experiencing a lot of depression or anxiety. Because if you're taking a medicine for, I don't know, for your thyroid or something like that, but it happens to have a side effect of increasing your heart rate, then that can cause you to be more anxious, or at least to feel very anxious because of that increase in heart rate. Having a previous episode of depression or anxiety. So if you have an episode of depression or anxiety at some point in your life, that gives you this predisposition to possibly have more episodes of depression or anxiety. And that's another thing where we don't necessarily know people's histories. So right now, and we're going to keep talking about how to recognize this with maybe coworkers, with employees, things like that. And we don't necessarily know what's in their past. And right now, during this time of stress, there can be a whole lot to come up and to get brought up again and cause anxiety or depression problems. A trauma is probably, it could definitely be the greatest risk of the greatest risk factor for having a depressive disorder or anxiety disorder, or having episodes of anxiety or depression. And trauma could be a whole lot of things. It could be that you might be a victim of abuse. It could be that you're a victim of domestic violence. By the way, domestic violence rates are are rising right now. People are in their homes, they're stressed out, and domestic abuse calls to hotlines are increasing right now. And so that's just generating more trauma. And the loss of loved ones, income, loss of your home. These are definitely issues right now as people are losing their incomes. People are losing loved ones to this disorder. So we're not just talking about past trauma, but this is a situation that is causing trauma in people. And if you want some really good information on trauma, there's a great TED Talk by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. I've got a link to it there. I don't know if you're going to share this slideshow with people or not, but you can just simply Google, trauma and anxiety TED Talk. And this will probably be the first one that shows up. But it talks about how childhood trauma affects your health across your whole lifetime. And she does a great job of talking about this, because she's a pediatrician, so she's really interested in childhood trauma. And one of the great points she makes is that childhood trauma is linked to 7 out of the top 10 leading causes of death in the United States. So if you want to decrease a lot of factors that go into the top 7 of the top 10 leading causes of death in the United States, we need to learn how to deal with trauma. So I really highly recommend everybody listens to that. I think it's like 16, 17 minutes long, but it's a great little TED Talk. Gives you a lot of information. So the stress and anxiety being caused by the COVID-19 pandemic is a reaction to perceived threat, not to the actual threat. And we need to keep this in mind, because some of us are really responding differently to this quarantine, to this threat of this disease. Some of us are responding very differently than others. And the actual threat that is against us doesn't matter. What matters is what people are perceiving. So for instance, I've got this little thing here, and if you look at it, we have reality. We have that there's a lot of facts that we do know about the COVID-19. There are safety precautions we can take, such as the quarantining. Some of us that are working in essential positions. Some people are working in healthcare, people are working in public safety, first responders, and people that are working in gas stations, people working in grocery stores. God bless them, because they're on the front lines there, right? But there's still a lot of safety precautions that they can take. And that's the reality of the situation, that if we all hunker down right now and do what we need to do, we can really minimize the impact. But the perceived threat that we have, of course, we've got social media, we've got rumors that we hear from our neighbor, we've got the news, which should have facts, but doesn't always. I think because sometimes they're competing with social media, trying to have the most sensational headlines, but sometimes they jump on stories. They don't have the most. Videos of spring breakers. We living here in Florida and seeing all those spring breakers coming to our beaches was kind of scary. Because they didn't seem to have much regard for the social distancing. Movies, I noticed that Outbreak is big on Netflix right now, the old movie Outbreak. I don't know that I would be watching that movie right now. I say old movie, it's not really very old. I don't think that I would be watching that movie right now, though. Karen on Facebook, of course, I'm just talking about anybody on Facebook that's spouting off information as if it is accurate facts, and it's not necessarily. Make sure you get your information from the Center for Disease Control, from the National Institute of Health, from people like that, not from Karen on Facebook. Toilet paper shortages. When we run out of toilet paper, that's a weird and scary thing. That's something I don't think we've ever experienced before. During hurricanes, we run out of bread and milk. Running out of toilet paper is interesting, but it starts kind of but that is an example of a great example of people catching anxiety from each other. People start buying toilet paper, then everybody thinks they have to have more toilet paper, and it just caught on, and everybody was searching for it, and has caused a lot of problems. So what depression and anxiety may look like, and focusing on work here for a moment, because we are, of course, here with the Chamber of Commerce, want to talk about what it might look like in the workplace. And somebody may be missing deadlines or details that they normally wouldn't. This is just a reality right now. We've talked about how much people's routines are being disrupted right now, how much stress is on people right now, the worry, the fear that people are under. And they may be missing things that they normally wouldn't. And that might be a sign, not that they're being lazy and that they're staying home and playing solitaire on the computer all day long. It might be that they're actually just experiencing a lot of anxiety over this. Someone may be more irritable or even argumentative with their coworkers. And a lot of these things, by the way, change is the big deal that I like to tell people look for. Look for what is a change in somebody's behavior. If somebody is normally very agreeable, a great team player, they're just a great person to work with, and now they're very irritable and they're argumentative. This may be a reaction to the stress that they're under right now. Somebody may be slower than usual, having difficulty focusing on their tasks. It's very hard to focus. I know I'm having a really hard time focusing on stuff right now. And I would imagine that's going to be a very common thing right now. People may complain of not feeling well physically or seem tired all the time. We just talked about how physical depression and anxiety truly can be. And if they're not feeling well physically, then that may be a sign of course, if they're coughing and their temperature is over 100.4, then they need to have that checked out. But if we're talking about someone having nausea, having stomach problems, have more so than normal, talking about people having a lot of aches and pains in their back and in their shoulders, this might be really showing a lot of stress. Someone may seem really disconnected from their team, not giving as much input as they are. Maybe they're quieter in all of our Zoom meetings that we're having right now. And maybe they're quieter than they usually are. They're not giving as much input. They're not giving as much original content as they normally would. They might just be really stressed out. And this might be a sign that they're having some depression or anxiety going on. A leader may have difficulty making decisions. Hey, guess what? Bosses and managers, supervisors are not immune to this. They're under stress just like everybody else is. And they may have difficulty making decisions, but not just leaders, I should say, but anybody that has to make any kind of decisions in their workspace. That could, it may be really difficult because when you're having a lot of anxiety, you're worried about making the wrong decisions. And there are a lot of people right now worried about making wrong decisions. Someone may be impatient. They might want answers very quickly because of the anxiety about not knowing something. Someone may be very insecure, unsure about their work. They may need a lot of reassurance that they're doing a good job, that they're doing fine. They may feel like they're under so much stress, pressure even, that right now if they're not performing, they might lose their job because of the economic pressures. And not to mention if they have family that's sick, with this disorder or with this disease, with COVID, or if they're at risk themselves, they might be having just so much anxiety. They may be very unsure of themselves. So those are just a few things to look at. And, one of the biggest things that I always talk about in our mental health first aid classes that I think is the biggest just warning sign that something's going on, that something's going on with someone. They may be experiencing some problems, they may be struggling with something, is that they become very socially isolated. They really separate themselves from people that they normally wouldn't. They're maybe separating themselves even from their family. They're not talking a lot, they're not saying a lot. When people become very socially isolated, that is a very, very common sign that they're struggling with something. But Shawn, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing right now? We're supposed to be socially isolated. That causes a problem, I would think, in noticing these problems. So, because that's actually what we're being ordered to do. But I think most people are finding ways to try and stay socially connected. I've known some people who are writing letters, to do it, like sending them in the mail. I know people actually do that still these days. And some people are doing that to combat it. People are talking on the phone. People are texting. People are using Zoom to do things not just work related. I don't know if you realize that, but people are using Zoom for a lot of things. I know people that are, having their hour of socialization after work through Zoom with people, little Zoom parties. So, but if people aren't participating in these kind of things, they're not doing it, then it might be, you might want to reach out to them, check with them, make sure that they're doing okay. Because this isolation can cause kind of a vicious cycle. Not only is isolation a consequence or a warning sign of someone having a mental health struggle, it can also feed into a mental health struggle. Human beings are meant to be social animals. We just are. It's how we are created. It's how we have evolved. However you want to look at it, we are social animals. And if someone has depression or an anxiety disorder, they will become more isolated. They withdraw commonly. But if you are isolated, that isolation itself can cause the depression and anxiety, because we are meant to live in community. That community looks different for everybody, for sure. Some people are very introverted. And I'm one of those people, actually. I'm happy to go home and sit and read a book all evening on Friday evening instead of going out with my friends. I love that. I'm very social. I'm very introverted, but again, it's about changes. You notice that somebody's changing their behavior and becoming more isolated than they normally would. Isolation might look a little bit different right now because we're all isolated. But we want people to still be engaging each other. We need people to still be communicating with each other and still having a way to form community in one way, shape, or form. And this is just a little graphic here about taking care of yourself while you're social distancing. This actually came from Mental Health First Aid, from their website. And these are some of the things that you have to take into consideration when you're taking care of yourself. Some of these things really go out the door when we're in these socially isolated situations. The best, corollary, I think, to this for us here in Florida is that it's kind of like a hurricane. And I remember last year when we were waiting for whichever hurricane was it that came through and really destroyed Puerto Rico. I can't remember right now. But when that hurricane came through and it was like stopped, it just stopped. And we were all waiting for it for a week. That feels very similar to me. We were all at home. We were all stuck at home. We didn't know what to do. We didn't have much to do. And when you're in those situations, you stop eating correctly, right? How many Oreos have I eaten over the past 3 weeks? Too many, I promise you. Not eating properly. Fortunately, my wife's a very good cook and she still loves to cook, so I am still eating some good food. Exercise is people are really losing their exercise routines. And exercise is just such an important thing that we can do for ourselves, not just for our physical health, but for our mental health. It releases endorphins, and which, if you don't know, those are the little chemicals in your brain that tell you happy. Those are your happy chemicals. So we need to do exercise for our mental health as well as our physical health. It says practice relaxation therapy there. There are a lot of techniques that you can look up. What they're referring to there, where it says voluntarily tensing and relaxing muscles, that's called progressive muscle relaxation. That's something you could Google, called progressive muscle relaxation. And it's something you can teach yourself how to do, about how to it kind of teaches your body the difference between what it feels like to be very tensed up and what it feels like to be relaxed. And it's really good. Not to mention other types of meditation, whether it's mindfulness meditation or yoga, for instance. Let light into your life. Good thing about this, as opposed to a hurricane, is we can go outside. And we need that sunlight. We talked about that earlier. The sunlight does do things for us chemically. It creates vitamin D and other things in our body that release serotonin and other important chemicals in our body. Be kind to yourself. And I would also add into that, be kind to each other. This is a time in which I think, and we're talking about work situations too, we have to talk about coworkers and such. This is a time to be very, I don't know if tolerance is the right word, but maybe we need to be very understanding of each other's behaviors. Everybody's really feeling stressed out right now. And we need to have a lot of, give people more leeway than you normally would, I would say. And also give yourself more leeway. Be kind to yourself. Don't expect yourself necessarily to get some of the things done that you normally would, because you may not be able to. These times are different. These times, you're going to do the best you can with what you have. Stay connected. Use technology. I'm the kind of guy that hates technology. Like I would rather sit and read a book and play my acoustic guitar in the backyard. I'm just not a technology guy. But right now, technology is saving us from a lot of things. And one of the things is that social isolation. So really learn how to connect with each other through it. I discovered Netflix during this situation. I did not have Netflix until last week, and it's been a lifesaver for me because it's such a great distraction. And, you know, kept me connected with a lot of my friends because now I have things to talk to them about because they were all watching these shows. But you do want to monitor your media consumption. That's another great thing that's got listed there. Staring at a screen all day is not the best thing for us. There's research that shows that it can make us very depressed. So you do want to monitor it, not to mention all the disinformation that we're getting these days from social media. So you want to limit that. This is another great graphic here that I found or that got sent around through the National Council on Behavioral Health. And just talking about caring for us, caring for ourselves and each other in a holistic way. We are very multifaceted creatures. We have a lot of different parts of our lives. And if one of those parts of our lives isn't doing well, it affects the other. So you have to take care of yourself in all of these ways. The physical ways, the psychological ways, emotional, spiritual, personal, and professional. Make sure that all of those needs are really being taken care of. These things, some of the things on here that sometimes you might read and think, well, that's silly. It says explore down under emotional. It says cuddle with your pet. Now, that, by the way, having a pet is very much a researched and recognized protective factor against suicide. It just is. People that have pets are less likely to die by suicide. By the way, I know that I think Ken is trying to help arrange for us to also have a suicide training on through this, and I hope that happens. It'll probably be with a guy named Angel, who's a good speaker. And please, I really hope everybody participates in that because it's a very important thing to think about. And that's one of the things he'll talk about is protective factors. And spiritual, if you are a part of a faith community, please continue to be a part of that faith community. And I'm a ministry student. I'm working on a Master's of Divinity degree. I'll be done hopefully late this year or early next year. And you know, those pieces are very, very important. And most churches and other religious organizations, whatever your religion may be, are really finding ways to stay connected. I know we are. We're doing all kinds of things. So make sure it says under professional up there, taking your full lunch break, keeping the kind of routine like you would have at work if you can. Leave work at work. Because if you are working from home right now, when you are clocked out with quotation marks around it, remain clocked out. Do not think that because your home office is your office now that you should be working 24 hours a day. Don't do that. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. Learn to say no to people. Learn to say that, hey, you know, learn how to set up those boundaries and just say, I don't know if I can handle that right now. If you're being offered something that maybe you can't do right now. So this wheel is really good. Make sure that you're taking care of each other. Some of these things you can't do so much right now, but really take care of your holistic well-being. So just talking about technology, take full advantage of it. Zoom, life-size, Facebook Live, Microsoft Team meetings, whatever the platform is that you're using, use it. Church is an interesting spot that our church has been using Zoom for all kinds of things. We've been having a little happy hour sometimes in the afternoon where we all get on to talk. Well, not everybody, but whoever wants to. I've actually been doing a concert on Friday nights where I just get on and play guitar and sing. And sometimes people request things and I'll sing and play. And we just have fun and just have ways to communicate, even though we're all in different places. And I think what's important there is that you wouldn't believe the emotional responses that we have gotten from people at church. You can see them in their little squares crying, and they are crying because they are connected with people and they haven't been able to be connected with people. And being in a Zoom meeting, it can just extremely connecting for some people. So use Zoom for fun too, not just for meetings. This was something I discovered, a Netflix party. Somebody told me about this a couple of weeks ago, where there's some kind of extension with Google Chrome that allows you to watch movies and shows at the same time as your friends and chat with each other while you're doing it. So there's some kind of platform for that. Great way to stay connected with each other. Look for things that you haven't had time to take advantage of till now. This is something I've done, like exploring podcasts, doing things like that. since I can't get out much in the evenings anymore, I'm stuck at home, I have time to look through things like that, and I'm discovering things that I really enjoy. So take full advantage of that, just to keep yourself distracted, keep yourself happy, keep the endorphins running. Virtual tours of museums, zoos, and national parks. This might be a good thing to do with your kids to try to help keep them occupied. There's a lot of people offering things like that. Also, I believe a lot of gyms are offering like classes, whether it's on yoga or whether it's on, whatever exercise routines and things that they're doing. Make sure you look into those too. But don't overdo your technology. This is a great example of a time where it's really coming in handy, but don't overdo it. Continue to get up, get active, do other things, go outside, see the real world with your real own eyes instead of through a screen every now and then. This is just a picture of FDR, and I thought about this because I thought about here in the business world, we might have some leaders listening right now, whether they're with their own business, with their corporation, with their agency, whatever it may be. And FDR did these fireside chats during the Great Depression. And, this is turning into a situation where people are having that kind of fear, just like they would have during the Depression. And he really took that opportunity to calm people's fears, to really as a leadership strategy. That was one of the big points of his strategy for his leadership was to calm the public's nerves, to dispel rumors, to give facts. Disseminating facts among employees and among coworkers, things that are facts that are coming from the Center for Disease Control or the World Health Organization or those kind of organizations, can help calm people's fears, because it's important for people to know what's right and what's not correct information. And remember that your most valuable resources are your humans, are your people, and we need to take care of them. So be willing to listen to people. And be willing to really take the time to make sure people know that you are listening to them. This is a time to have an open door policy. It just is. People really experiencing unusually high levels of stress. And body language may be a little hard to communicate over Zoom or over your technology, but not so much. You still have a lot of facial expression. Remember that probably 75% of the things that we say to people, we never actually say. It's all in our body expressions. It's in our facial expressions and our body language. Paraphrase what people are saying to you. If they're talking to you about something because they're really upset, let them talk 75% of the time at least. You're just listening most of the time, and then rephrase what they say. So I hear you saying that it's really hard working from home because you've got your kids kind of running in and out of the house and they're having to do school from home. I hear that's hard. And that gives them the opportunity to say, yeah, it confirms that you're listening to them, and it confirms that you actually understood what they're saying. So repeating something back to them in your own words that they said is extremely helpful. We call that paraphrasing or summarizing. Do not judge people. People might be telling you right now, I'm having a really, really hard time working from home. I'm having a really, really hard time focusing on my work. Now's not the time probably to be the rough boss and say, well, you just got to pull it together. You got to, we got to all go through this. We're all struggling. Well, everybody really is experiencing the struggle in different ways. And being judgmental towards people isn't going to help. Just listen. Giving advice may not really help, because sometimes just listening to people is enough. Sometimes if you're giving advice, it gives you the impression that you're not really listening. You're just thinking of solutions and throwing them at them, and it's not really that you're not really listening to them. So people may repeat themselves a lot is another thing that if people are talking to you, it's important to recognize, because people who are experiencing trauma or grief, those are very common reactions. So people repeat themselves over and over again as if they're still trying to work it out in their own head. And this is a pretty traumatic situation for a lot of people. So professional resources. If somebody does need to have some professional help, you do think that you need to refer them some professional help. Remember your EAPs, your employee assistance programs. They are historically underutilized. I don't know how they are being used right now. I don't know, but remember those programs. Sometimes, whatever your benefits packages may offer, those free counseling sessions. A lot of therapists are doing telehealth now, where you can meet with your therapist through Zoom or whatever platform it is that they're using, and you can still take full advantage of these mental health professionals. Insurance companies can usually provide you with a list of mental health professionals. Now, it is sometimes, you know, people have to go to the doctor first to get to their primary care doctor to get referrals if they need to go to another mental health professional. That's okay and is a good thing, because as I mentioned earlier, sometimes depression or anxiety is caused by things um, like side effects of medication. So, you know, if you're going to your primary care doctor and they can review your medication list, that might be really good. They might say, you know, maybe this blood pressure medicine is raising your heart rate a little bit or something. Maybe we need to just change it or lower your dose. Maybe it'll make you feel a little better. So it is a great place to start. Also, they can rule out other physical problems. They can test your thyroid, for instance. If your thyroid is off, it can make you feel depressed and anxious and all kinds of things. So it's a great place to start. There's nothing wrong with talking to your primary care doctor about these issues. Plus, they're very available. It's easier to get an appointment with them. Telehealth is being used extensively, including with therapists, including with psych nurse practitioners and other professionals. We're using it a lot at SMA. And speaking of SMA Healthcare, we're the biggest provider here for mental health services and behavioral health services in Volusia, Flagler, Putnam, and St. Johns counties. So we have our access number. I put it up there on the screen. If you're having any kind of problems with mental health or substance abuse issues, and this includes if this is a friend or family member or somebody that does not have insurance, we have sliding scale rates that are pretty darn affordable. So please contact us, even if they need inpatient care because they're in crisis, or if they just need some outpatient appointments, we can set them up with that. Just call that number with the person. We have inpatient and outpatient care. We have a crisis center for when people are, you know, need some more serious level of help. We also have inpatient substance abuse rehab facilities. In Volusia County, we have the Rape Crisis Center. We have the crisis response team. This is an interesting one. If you have friends, family members that are 25 or under, call that 800 number and ask for the crisis response team. And this is a team that has mobile capacity. They can come to the person. They can also video chat with the person. And they're trained to do crisis counseling with people under 25. And so that's a great resource for people to have someone to talk to and try and work through these problems if they're in crisis. Other hotlines that are out there, National Suicide Prevention Hotline is well known, 1-800-273-TALK. And hopefully, actually, the legislation did get passed recently, if I understand correctly, that soon that number will be 988. So kind of like 911 for emergencies, you have 988. And by the way, 911 is an appropriate number to call if someone was under a serious psychiatric crisis, like perhaps maybe they're suicidal. 911 is an appropriate number to call too. I didn't put that up there, but I should have. The crisis text line. If you've got somebody that would rather text, you think they would feel more comfortable texting, you can text the word home to the number 741-741. And that will initiate a conversation through text messaging with a trained crisis counselor. SAMHSA Disaster Distress Helpline. And it has a number, and it also has a text there. If you'd rather text, you can text "Talk with Us" to 66746. And I was just sharing with Ken earlier that I read an article that said that the calls to that particular hotline had increased by, I think it was 891% over the last few weeks. So that tells you how much stress people are under right now and how much people are looking for resources, looking for ways to get help with their depression, with their anxiety, with other issues that are coming up. We also have things called WarmLines. I've never used any of these WarmLines here, but these are 3 that are located in Florida, apparently. And what a WarmLine is the concept is, instead of a hotline where you're in crisis, a WarmLine is when you're not quite in crisis, but you need to talk to somebody. And so these are a few lines here that are numbers where a lot of times they're peer supported, like it says that one there in Gainesville. It's peer supported WarmLine. So that means that most of the people on there are peer, meaning that there are people who have also struggled with mental health struggles and are living and recovering and doing well now. One of the things they're doing is helping talk other people through those issues. So that's what WarmLines are, and they're an interesting concept. But also use your Google. We all have the world's biggest yellow pages in our pocket now with our phones, and use Google, because I believe there's also a national WarmLine. WarmLines they're kind of loosely associated. They're all over the place. So those are just 3 that I located that are in Florida. Some other things that are going on, you had depression and bipolar peer support groups that meet in person. There are some that meet like at Halifax Hospital, for instance, and at SMA on 1220 Willis Avenue in Daytona. We also have, they have online groups. And these are peer support groups. So these are people who also live with depression or bipolar disorder, and they're all just talking with each other and helping each other. And Alcoholics and Narcotics Anonymous meetings are also happening online. And there are a few links that you can search, and you can find meetings that are happening online. And National Alliance on Mental Illness is also another. NAMI is a nationwide organization that has local chapters in every region that you can find and you can get into contact with. Then I have another, SAMHSA. SAMHSA stands for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. If you don't know that, that's a government organization, department, I should say. And there's a link there at the bottom of that page too. And that just has a lot of different various resources. It's kind of too much for me to list. I thought I'd list a few of the ones that are kind of big and well known. And here's just a few places that I've looked for some of these things. So the main point here that I hope everybody sees is that isolation is really going to cause a spike in mental health concerns. And whether it's in people that already have an underlying mental health condition, this has the potential to really exacerbate their underlying mental health condition, or that people may develop a problem with depression or anxiety from this. The biggest thing is being able to notice it and just being able to help them maybe have a few places to look where they may be able to get help. And that's mostly what I have, Ken. I don't know if you happen to have any questions from anybody. I'd be happy to try and answer them. I think
Yeah, let me share a couple of thoughts that I had and questions that I had. I had to chuckle when you talked about the ability to go out and just get some sunlight, and our opportunity to do that, particularly here in Florida, because most of the time in this kind of, when we're sheltering in place, like you mentioned, it tends to be a hurricane and is not something you want to do, go out and take a walk.
No.
But in this situation, that's such a valuable piece. I lived in Pennsylvania for 18 years, and cabin fever it's a very real thing. You go through the winter and the days are very short. It's very cold. You're bundled up. It's so cold outside. You don't want to be outside of doors. The first real kind of warm day in the spring, it's amazing. It's like the front porches in Pennsylvania bloom residents like flowers in a garden. It's remarkable. One question I did want to ask you about, because the focus of this was talking about mental health, but obviously we're sheltering in place because of a physical illness and virus that we're dealing with. Can physical illnesses, like let's say, for example, somebody has a heart attack, but they're young, let's say they're in their 40s, and can that complicate or contribute to mental illness situations where they think, I'm too young to have a heart attack, and start to maybe beat themselves up about things they've done? Do those things work hand in hand like that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Mental health and physical health are connected, and I'd really go further than saying that they're connected. And that's kind of colloquial. They're way further than connected. They are one and the same. Mental health conditions affect an organ of your brain or an organ of your body that happens to be your brain. If you have kidney disease, it affects your kidneys. You have high blood pressure, it's affecting your heart and your blood vessels. If you have cirrhosis, it's affecting your liver. If you have a mental illness, or just a struggle with mental health, it doesn't mean you necessarily have a diagnosis, but if you're having a struggle, it just happens to be affecting an organ of your body that is your brain. And physical health concerns, because one of the things that really happens with depression, for example, is beating yourself up, having a lot of negative thoughts, just beating yourself up. And I think that's a good example of when you have something like heart disease that may limit the things that you can do that you used to be able to do, may limit the things you can eat. This definitely can make someone very depressed, for example. So yeah, it's very connected. Physical health and mental health just are like this. They just go together, and you have to treat the whole person. Everything needs to be holistic.
Second question for you would be with regard to recognizing signs, and I want to look at this particularly through the lens of the workplace. How do you gently and effectively approach a colleague to express concern for them? It's kind of first question, peer-to-peer, where you're on kind of the same reporting level within an organization. And then if you could, after that, address how do you approach somebody who is a superior to you that you think might be experiencing some of these challenges, for fear of not putting your own position in jeopardy because they are in a situation where they're maybe not making decisions with the best interests of themselves or the organization in mind. So first, how do you approach somebody peer-to-peer? And then how do you approach someone who's maybe in a management position?
I think the answer is similar. Of course, though, when you have someone in a management position, it depends on how your relationship is with them, because I do understand you're going to be concerned, but you're going to be concerned about any kind of repercussions from that. But, hopefully we can eventually progress to a world where asking someone about their mental health isn't considered like an insult. It should be considered, hey, I'm just kind of concerned. One of the things that we always say in mental health first aid is using I statements. And what we mean by that is saying what you observe about the person. So not saying, I think you're doing this, but it means like, so I noticed you haven't been coming to lunch break with us recently. You used to all the time. Is everything okay? So you just say what you noticed. I noticed you missed a couple deadlines. I mean, I'm not mad about that. I get it. We're all stressed out right now, but I just noticed it. I wanted to make sure you're okay. So just telling people what you've observed, not telling them how they're acting. You're being really, here's the difference, Ken. If I say, I noticed you've missed a couple deadlines recently, or I say, you've missed some deadlines recently. So the I statement versus the you statement. The you statement is blame. The you statement is accusatory. The I statement is, hey, I'm just noticing something. You doing okay? So that's one big thing that I like to point out, is just make it all about your own observations. Just that you've noticed something, and just expressing that you are concerned, making sure that they understand the reason you're saying that is just because you're concerned, not because you're trying to blame them for something. You just want to make sure that they're okay.
Well, Shawn, I really appreciate you sharing your time and expertise for this session today. I think it's so valuable, and yet it's perhaps underutilized, as a term you used earlier with some of the resources. I think in part because we don't want to. It's a little scary for us to think about our own inability to be able to handle something. There's almost, I think, a sense of self-indictment that goes along with that. And so it's really a courageous step to be able to identify those things. So thank you for helping us and our members and the general public in the Volusia County area be able to say, hey, here's some tools you can recognize, and it's okay. And we all need help. I think people underestimate how common some of these things are, that they might just think, hey, I'm just having a bad day. Maybe not. Maybe there's something else going on.
If your bad day turns into a bad month, and it's like mood related, or it is this constant state of worry that you can't lift yourself out of. Can you lift yourself out of diabetes? Well, no. Can you lift yourself out of heart disease? Well, no. You can do things to help those things, though, right? You can change your diet for both of those instances, for instance. So you can start exercising. The same thing with mental health. You can do things to improve your mental health. But sometimes you also need something extra, like a professional helping you through it, whether that's medicine or whether it's therapy or whether it's whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. And one of the most important things that you just hit on really is that it's okay to ask people for help. And one of the things you need to encourage with people that are experiencing trauma is to make sure that they let you know what they need. Make sure they understand, because people just shut down, right? So you need people to know that it's okay to say what you need, communicate to other people what you need. And maybe as leaders in the business world, that might be a good thing. Just making sure you communicate with your employees and with your coworkers that it's okay to tell me what you need. Don't be afraid to ask and to tell me what it is that you need.
Well, thanks again, Shawn, for sharing your time. Thanks to everybody at SMA. It's I think you are probably on the front lines as much as the healthcare workers who are staffing our local hospitals and doctors' offices who are treating patients, and perhaps a little unsung, but kudos to you, and thank you for all the work that you're doing in the community. And we look forward to doing some of this programming again with you in the future, where hopefully there's not such an immediate crisis need we're addressing. We can do a little more prevention as opposed to reaction.
Yeah, I hope so. And I hope to be able to offer it to more people. My mental health first aid seminar that I do, that is a full day, but it's very well worth it. to learn more about mental health concerns. So, you know, I would love to be able to offer that to anybody that would be interested in that too, once we can do it again.
Yeah. Well, very good, Shawn. Be well. Thanks again for all the time, and we'll see you on the flip side when hopefully we can do some of this stuff in person in the near future.
Looking forward to it, Ken. Thanks so much.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and have a great rest of your week.